The man standing before them, terrifying enough to send them fleeing at the mere act of removing his mask, is none other than Jason, the most feared killer of all time. But his terror lies not only in his raw strength, it's his supernatural ability to resurrect after each defeat. This time, in order to expand his murderous ambitions, Jason has resolutely left his old haunt of Crystal Lake, bare-handed. He has now arrived in the bustling metropolis of New York City, where crowds are everywhere. A few days earlier, a passing ship disrupted the peace of Crystal Lake. On board, a young couple, unable to resist their urges, the two decided to cram up their knowledge of physiology. Jim went outside to drop the anchor for the boat. Little did he know, this action would release a sealed evil and ultimately cost him his life. To create a tense atmosphere, Jim began telling Susie a scary story about Crystal Lake.
There was this boy named Jason Voorhees, drowned in Crystal Lake about 30 years ago. None of the counselors heard him. A bunch of years went by. Everyone forgot about it. And that's when the murder started to happen.
Jason's mother had once believed it was a counselor's negligence that caused her son's death, leading her to try and kill everyone in revenge. But in the end, she was decapitated herself. Thus began Jason's series of massacres, vowing to kill every young person in the Crystal Lake area. Seeing the fear on Susie's face, Jim quickly cut off the story, reassuring her that it was just a scary tale. What he didn't know, however, was that Jason's corpse lay at the bottom of Crystal Lake, right under the boat. Due to the water currents, the boat exerted a strong pull. The anchor, as it sank, caught onto an underwater cable. As it pulled, the cable snapped, sending a massive electric current surging through Jason's body. To everyone's horror, Jason, who had been resting on the lakebed for years, was revived by this electric shock. The rising smoke and flashing lights on the lake's surface signaled the beginning of another massacre. Susie, with sharp ears, heard strange noises, and immediately recalled the ghost story she had just heard. Prompted by her, Jim reluctantly got up to check. But minutes passed, and Jim hadn't returned. Growing worried, Susie put on her clothes and slowly approached the control room. Suddenly, a figure wearing a hockey mask leapt out and stabbed Susie with a knife. However, it wasn't Jason, it was Jim, playing a prank. Little did he know that this joke was about to turn deadly. But as the young couple climbed back into bed, the real Jason had already quietly climbed aboard the ship. He picked up the hockey mask and a harpoon lying on the table. Watching the entwined couple on the bed, Jason's inner rage burned, and he savagely murdered Jim. After Jason killed Jim, Susie, who had just been in the throes of passion, ran out without looking back. But since the boat was in the middle of the lake, unless Susie could sprout wings, there was no way she could escape. And, of course, Jason wouldn't let her go that easily. Sure enough, within minutes, Jason found Susie's hiding place. Harpoon in hand, never one for mercy, Jason ignored her pleas, ruthlessly stabbing her with the harpoon, and then considerately closing the deck cabin door. Thus began Jason's killing spree. From that very night onward, the next day, at the seaside dock, a group of soon-to-graduate teenagers were eagerly awaiting the start of their graduation trip. Their chaperone was a teacher named Colleen, who had come up with the idea of taking a boat trip to New York as a memorable graduation experience. Another teacher, Charles, was also coming along. At first, he had no issue with the plan, but as they were about to board, Charles suddenly realized that Colleen had also invited his niece, Rennie, along for the trip. Colleen wanted Rennie, her exceptional student, to be part of this journey as well. Although Charles was Rennie's uncle, there was no hug or even a simple greeting when they saw each other. Ignoring Charles's gaze, Rennie, accompanied by her pet dog, headed straight onto the boat. Since Rennie's parents had passed away, Charles had become her sole guardian. He felt that Rennie should consult him before making any decisions about what she did. However, Rennie was already an adult, and Charles's strange need to control her was a source of frustration for her. No matter how much Charles objected, Colleen firmly stated that Rennie had the right to make her own decisions. Now that Rennie was already on board, Charles was left with no choice but to accept it, though reluctantly. And so, with the sound of the boat's horn, this fateful journey began. It was bound to be anything but ordinary, because, unbeknownst to everyone, Jason, freshly revived, had also boarded the ship. Out on the vast ocean, the students finally began to unwind. They played games and relaxed on the deck, unaware that danger was slowly creeping closer. Watching the couples cuddling nearby, Sean, the captain's son, felt somewhat irritated. Just as he was about to return to his cabin, he ran into Rennie. Their connection was deeper than mere classmates, though they hadn't quite reached the level of being lovers. Although he had heard Rennie wouldn't be on the trip, Sean had prepared a gift for her, a unique Statue of Liberty necklace. The Statue of Liberty symbolized freedom and breaking free from constraints, something that resonated with Rennie. She handed the necklace to Sean, asking him to help her put it on. Taking the opportunity, Sean invited Rennie to climb the Statue of Liberty together sometime in the future. Just then, Charles appeared and interrupted them, telling Sean that his father was looking for him. After Sean left, Charles turned to Rennie, ready to chastise her, claiming he was deeply concerned about her. Furthermore, the weather forecast predicted a storm that evening. He urged Rennie to return to shore, warning that if anything went wrong, her dark past might be exposed. When Rennie was a child, she had once nearly drowned, leaving her with a deep fear of water. But to Rennie, that was all just her Uncle Charles's perspective, so she firmly refused his suggestion to leave. In the end, Charles had no choice but to reluctantly let her stay on the trip. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the ship, JJ had ventured alone into the engine room, guitar in hand, hoping to capture the perfect acoustics for her music video. She believed that only the echoes in this room could fully showcase her talent, unaware that this decision would seal her fate. As she began to play, a figure appeared behind her. Jason, drawn to the sound of her music, he slowly descended the stairs, and when JJ glanced up, she caught sight of Jason. The shock of his sudden appearance made her forget all about her music dreams. She dropped her guitar and bolted, but Jason wasn't one to let his prey escape. He picked up the guitar and chased after JJ. With a scream, her life ended in a burst of blood. Meanwhile, back in the cabin, Rennie, now reassured by her uncle's reluctant approval, prepared to enjoy her graduation trip. As she was changing clothes, she suddenly heard little boy calling for help from outside the window. At first, Rennie thought she must have misheard, since the ship was out at sea, but as she moved closer, she actually saw young Bay pounding on the window, desperately asking for help. Before vanishing, sensing danger, her pet dog immediately jumped off the bed and ran out, and Rennie quickly followed. While she was on deck looking for her dog, she stumbled upon Tamara and Eva, who were secretly preparing to indulge in some contraband. Seeing Rennie, Tamara warmly invited her to join them. Knowing the risks, Rennie refused without hesitation and hurriedly left to continue her search for her dog. Jason, meanwhile, was busy prowling the ship, searching for his next victim. One of the boys, after losing a boxing match, headed to the sauna to relax. Jason soon found his way there and opened the sauna door. Hearing someone enter, the boy, who had a towel over his face, assumed it was a friend. Jason picked up a scalding rock and pressed it firmly into the boy's chest. After a brief struggle, the boy lay motionless, and Jason, satisfied, left to find his next target. Elsewhere, after Rennie left, Tamara and Eva's mischief was interrupted when Charles caught them acting suspiciously. Fear that the teacher will tell the parents, the two decided to retaliate against Charles. Their real target, however, was someone else. Still unable to find her dog, Rennie went up to the deck to have a heart-to-heart with Colleen. At that moment, Tamara and Eva quietly approached and, pretending it was an accident, shoved Rennie overboard. Seeing Rennie struggling in the water, Colleen immediately threw her a life ring. As Rennie reached for it, she felt a hand firmly grasp her leg and drag her down. Looking down in terror, she realized it was little boy, the same figure she'd seen at the window. Reaching out to her again, panicked, Rennie summoned all her strength and managed to break free, eventually resurfacing. Hearing the commotion, Sean rushed over and, without a second thought, dived in after her. With the help of the life ring, Sean finally managed to pull Rennie to safety. The incident had shaken her deeply, and the vision of little boy underwater left her unable to calm down. Charles, hearing the noise, came out to find Rennie soaking wet. Immediately realizing what had happened, he strictly warned Colleen and Sean to stay away from Rennie and prepared to take her back to her room. Just then, the ship's janitor appeared, muttering something cryptic to Charles and Rennie.
Just come back, and you're all gonna die.
The janitor mentioned was none other than Jason, who had recently been revived by the electric shock and boarded the ship. Before the ship even departed, the janitor had noticed bloodstains on the window of the boat where the couple Jason had killed had been. And when Jason killed Jay, he had also heard her scream. The reason he hadn't reported this to the captain was due to the haunting stories he'd heard, fearing he might become Jason's next victim. After parting with her uncle, Rennie headed to the restroom to calm her nerves, but as she was washing up, something strange began to happen. The once clear faucet water suddenly turned crimson, and as Rennie looked up in confusion, a ghostly hand shot out from the mirror, gripping her throat tightly. The hand belonged to a twisted-looking young boy. Using all her strength, Rennie managed to break free from his grasp, but to her shock, the little boy suddenly asked her for help. When everything returned to normal, Rennie glanced back at the mirror, only to find no trace of the ghostly vision. Because of her childhood near-drowning incident, Rennie assumed it was all just a hallucination brought on by her own fears, but she was unaware that a terrifying threat had boarded the ship along with her. Meanwhile, Charles, furious at Tamara for mocking Rennie, decided to confront her in her cabin. He warned that if she didn't produce her report, he would report her to the school and her parents. However, Tamara was unfazed. She calmly slipped off her bathrobe, attempting to seduce Charles into a deal. Although Charles protested and tried to leave, Tamara had anticipated his reaction and had arranged for Wayne, who had a camera, to record footage that could be used to blackmail him. Fuming, Charles stormed out of the room, followed shortly by Wayne, whom Tamara promptly kicked out as well. But soon after, the door creaked open again, and this time, it was Jason. Hearing the noise, Tamara peeked through the door crack and saw a figure wearing a hockey mask. While she wondered if this was some oddball passenger, Jason's massive hand smashed through the door, grabbing her by the hair. He entered the room, punched the mirror above the sink, and, taking a shard of broken glass, killed the scheming Tamara. No one heard her scream, as a violent storm outside masked all sounds with thunderous crashes. The worsening weather worried the captain, who immediately began adjusting the ship's speed with his first mate. Little did they know that Jason's next targets were them. Feeling his age, the captain asked his first mate to take over while he went to rest for a bit. The first mate, focused on steering, didn't notice anything amiss behind him. Jason approached silently with a harpoon and stabbed him from behind, repeatedly, until the first mate lay lifeless. When the captain returned and found his first mate's body, he knelt down to inspect it, only for Jason to appear and slash his throat with a machete. Shortly after, Sean brought Rennie to the bridge, planning to ask his father to turn the ship back, only to discover his father's corpse. Realizing the killer was still on board, Sean fought through his grief and quickly used the intercom to summon everyone to the bridge. Then he went to the radio to contact the Coast Guard for help. But just as someone answered, Jason severed the radio line outside, cutting off their connection to the Coast Guard. Hearing the announcement, Charles and the others hurried to the bridge. The last to arrive was the janitor, who repeated his ominous warnings about the dangers lurking on board. Charles, enraged by his cryptic words, grabbed a machete and threatened to strike the janitor. Sensing the danger, the janitor left with one final warning before disappearing into the ship. Charles stubbornly refused to believe that the killer could be the resurrected Jason, insisting that the murderer had to be someone else, possibly even the janitor, although he had no evidence to back this up. At that moment, Julius spoke up, pointing out that regardless of who the killer was, a murder had indeed occurred, and their top priority should be gathering everyone and finding a way to stop the killer. He proposed tracking down and killing the killer before they could be found, but Charles shot down his idea, perhaps out of his desire to maintain control or a genuine concern for the students' safety. He demanded that everyone follow his orders. However, Julius and some of the other recent graduates were unwilling to listen to Ignoring Charles's objections, Julius rallied his friends to start a search for Jason. The next unfortunate victim was about to be Eva. After hearing the announcement, Eva noticed that Tamara was nowhere to be found, so she went to her cabin to look for her. To her horror, she discovered Tamara's cold, lifeless body in the bathroom. Panicked, Eva bolted from the room, but as soon as she turned into the hallway, she ran straight into Jason, realizing she might meet the same fate as Tamara. Eva snapped out of her shock and started running for her life, screaming for help. Unfortunately, no one responded. Desperate, she ducked into the dance hall, where loud music and flashing lights filled the space. Jason was right behind her. Eva tried to escape through another door, but luck wasn't on her side. All the exits were locked. Growing impatient, Jason appeared behind her, grabbed her by the throat, and lifted her into the air, choking the life out of her as she hung in the air, her legs dangling until she stopped moving. Elsewhere on the ship, Julius and his friends prepared to ambush Jason, who they assumed was hiding somewhere in the shadows. Julius handed out weapons to his friends, whatever they could find that could deal some damage, though he confidently chose to go in barefisted, trusting his boxing skills to take down Jason. However, after a moment's hesitation, he also picked up a gun from the floor. Yet, despite their plans, the group made a serious mistake. They decided to split up, playing right into Jason's hands. as he was known for picking off his targets one by one. The first to fall victim was Wayne. Even in this life-or-death situation, Wayne couldn't abandon his dream of filmmaking and carried his camera wherever he went. As he searched the ship's lower engine room for Jason, a sudden blast of steam shot out of a pipe, knocking his glasses off. Now unable to see clearly, Wayne spotted a shadowy figure up ahead. Unable to tell friend from foe and acting out of fear, Wayne pulled the trigger without hesitation. As he approached the figure, he realized with horror that he had accidentally shot a fellow student. Before he could even process what he'd done, he saw a pair of large boots through his camera lens. It was Jason. Jason swatted the camera aside with a single blow. Wayne, though furious, knew survival was his priority. He spun around and started running, but he tripped after only a few steps, stumbling over JJ's corpse. That brief moment of shock gave Jason enough time to catch up. Perhaps inspired by his own resurrection through electrocution, Jason grabbed Wayne and threw him onto the generator to see how a living person would react to high-voltage shock. But unlike Jason, Wayne was no match for the electricity, and his body finally went still under the intense current. Soon, the entire engine room burst into flames, and Jason, satisfied, hit the alarm. Back on the bridge, Sean's efforts had finally gotten the ship back on course, but just as he breathed a sigh of relief, the alarm blared over the ship's intercom. Seeing this, Charles pulled out a flare gun. Looking ready for action, Colleen thought he intended to signal for help and reminded him that the bad weather would likely make any signal difficult to spot. However, Charles's plan was to hunt down the killer and take him out with the flare gun. Convinced that whoever triggered the fire alarm was the murderer, Charles suspected someone was deliberately inciting panic on the ship. Yet he remained fixated on the janitor as the killer, believing his odd behavior was proof enough. Meanwhile, out on the deck, another student wearing a purple jacket was searching for Jason with an axe in hand. Before he could locate Jason, though, Jason appeared right behind him. The student, emboldened by his weapon, chose to attack rather than flee. But Jason, far stronger, easily seized the axe and threw it aside. Now weaponless and terrified, the student abandoned his bravado and scrambled up to the lookout platform, hoping it would be safe. But his plan failed, as Jason followed him up without hesitation. Reaching the top, Jason grabbed the student and hurled him down from the lookout. When Julius heard the commotion and rushed over, he was met with the horrifying sight of his friend impaled on a metal pole. Before he could react, Jason appeared behind him and threw him overboard into the sea. With this, the search team Julius had organized was completely wiped out. After the murders were discovered, Rennie's uncle Charles locked her in her cabin for her own safety. As she sat there, bored and anxious, she suddenly turned to see that eerie young boy from before, once again appearing in her room. Terrified, Rennie backed away, only to have Jason suddenly appear behind her. He smashed his head through the window, reaching in and grabbing her by the throat. In desperation, Rennie groped around and grabbed a pen from the table, stabbing it directly into Jason's eye. With a howl of pain, Jason released her, and as if by magic, the ghostly boy disappeared. Shaken to her core, Rennie was about to leave the room when Sean burst in. Finding comfort in Sean's presence, Rennie clung to him, but their relief was short-lived. As the lights began to flicker, a massive explosion in the engine room had ignited a fire, causing a power failure that plunged the entire ship into darkness. This chaotic environment was just what Jason thrived in. Elsewhere, Charles, still searching for the killer, held his flare gun as he crept into the ship's kitchen. Unbeknownst to him, a figure was quietly approaching from behind. Suddenly, the janitor, the same man who had warned them earlier, emerged from the shadows. Fortunately, neither made any sudden moves. Meanwhile, seawater started flooding the lower decks due to the explosion in the engine room. If they didn't find a way off the ship soon, everyone would be doomed. As Sean led Rennie through the halls, they ran into Charles coming out of the kitchen. Charles blamed Sean and Colleen for putting Rennie in danger, but at this point, there was no time to argue. Just then, Miss Colleen appeared, announcing that she had lowered the lifeboat and that they could escape if they made it to the deck. As the four of them reached the deck, they encountered the janitor staggering toward them. Charles raised his flare gun, preparing to shoot, but before he could act, the janitor collapsed, revealing a hatchet buried in his back. With the janitor's death, Charles's theory was completely disproven. Now, even he had to accept that Jason had somehow come back to life. The four of them climbed down a rope ladder into the lifeboat. As the last one down, Sean, by the flash of lightning, glimpsed Jason watching them from above. Just seeing Jason standing there sent a shiver down their spines. Once they were all on board, they immediately began rowing, desperate to get as far from the ship as possible. Suddenly, A figure surfaced beside the boat and clambered, and it was Julius, who had managed to survive despite being thrown into the sea. Though he was drenched and had swallowed a lot of seawater, he had miraculously escaped with his life. With everyone's combined effort, the lifeboat finally drifted away from the wrecked ship, but lost in the vast ocean and surrounded by thick fog. They couldn't determine their direction and could only hope for the best. By some miracle, after blindly rowing for an entire day and night, they finally arrived in New York City. Seeing the iconic Statue of Liberty, the 5 survivors felt a surge of relief and excitement. They eagerly paddled toward shore, ready to embrace the freedom they'd fought so hard to reach. Yet, as soon as they set foot on land, Jason emerged from the water behind them. The massacre was far from over, only the setting had changed. To Jason, who was used to the isolation of Crystal Lake, the bustling streets of New York were entirely foreign. But as he looked up, he saw a giant billboard featuring a character in a hockey mask. For a moment, Jason seemed bewildered, as if he thought he'd already made a name for himself here in New York. With this strange boost of confidence, he began to roam the city streets without restraint. Meanwhile, the 5 survivors, thinking they'd escaped danger, were busy looking for a public phone booth. Before they could find one, they ran into a pair of muggers who brandished guns, demanding all their money. One of the thugs, however, took a special interest in Rennie, making lewd comments and roughly grabbing her. They threatened Charles and the others, warning them not to follow. Dragging Rennie into a dark alley, one of the muggers forcefully injected a syringe into her arm. But as they prepared to take things further, Jason, who had witnessed the scene, was outraged. He picked up the syringe they discarded and plunged it into one of the muggers with brutal force. The other thug, horrified, pulled out his gun and fired at Jason, but the bullets had no effect. As Jason approached, he grabbed the thug's head and smashed it against a metal pipe, killing him instantly. Taking advantage of the distraction, Rennie managed to escape the alley. Jason calmly followed after her. Meanwhile, back at the phone booth, Charles organized a plan to rescue Rennie. Julius, tasked with calling for help, finally found a phone booth. Just as he was reporting their location, Jason suddenly appeared behind him. Breaking free from Jason's grip, Julius bolted out of the booth and dashed up a nearby staircase to a rooftop. But when he reached the top, he realized too late that he'd trapped himself. With no way forward and Jason close behind, desperate and with nowhere to turn, Julius decided to face Jason head-on. He believed his boxing skills would be enough to take Jason down. At first, his punches were powerful and precise, momentarily forcing Jason to step back. Jason didn't strike back. He simply absorbed each punch like a silent punching bag. Julius continued to throw punch after punch, his fists connecting over and over, as if waiting for the right moment, but his stamina quickly drained, while Jason remained unfazed, standing firm, exhausted and unable to throw another punch. Julius had nothing left to give. That's when Jason finally seized his chance to strike back. Jason grabbed Julius by the shoulders, using his full strength to deliver a single, devastating punch that sent Julius's head flying. It rolled along the edge of the roof and finally landed in a trash can below. Meanwhile, Rennie, having escaped the alley, reunited with Charles, Sean, and Colleen. Sean relayed Rennie's shocking revelation that Jason had somehow made his way to New York, but Charles, stubborn as ever, dismissed their fears as nonsense, refusing to believe that Jason was truly after them. A nearby police officer, sensing the gravity of the situation, decided to take them to the station to call for backup. As he opened the driver's door, the others in the back seat caught sight of a gruesome sight: Julius's severed head. The horrified officer quickly radioed for backup, but before he could finish, Jason ambushed him, dragging him into a nearby alley. Terrified and desperate to escape, the group decided to flee the scene. Rennie bravely climbed into the driver's seat of the police car, but as she glanced up, she saw Jason standing ominously in the middle of the road up ahead. Though fear gripped her, Rennie summoned her courage and floored the accelerator, aiming the car straight at Jason. Jason didn't flinch and was sent flying to the side of the road when the car hit him. Thinking they'd finally escaped, the group continued driving, only to see that haunting young boy standing in the street up ahead, desperately reaching out to Rennie for help. Rennie, overwhelmed, lost control of the car, which crashed headlong into a roadside barrier. Charles and Sean helped to shake Rennie out of the wreck, but they failed to notice that someone was missing. Moments later, the police car exploded, trapping Miss Colleen, who had been like a mother to Rennie. Inside, she perished in the flames. The vision of the young boy had triggered something in Rennie. dredging up memories of her childhood and the origin of her deep-seated fear of water, an experience that could be traced back to Charles. Years ago, when Rennie was just a child, Charles had taken her to Crystal Lake to learn how to swim. Frustrated by her lack of progress, Charles warned her that if she didn't learn, she'd end up drowning in the lake just like Jason. Not only that, but he told her a terrifying tale, saying that Jason would drag anyone who couldn't swim down to the lake's depths to keep him company. Young Rennie had doubted the story, but to her horror, Charles pushed her unprepared into the lake in a desperate attempt to make her swim. As she flailed helplessly, something grabbed her leg, pulling her downward. In that moment of sheer terror, she saw the young Jason beneath the water, clutching her ankle with a firm grip. Since then, this traumatic memory had haunted Rennie, forever turning water into a nightmare. Triggered by the memories, Rennie confronted her uncle Charles, asking why he had done such a terrible thing to her as a child. Yet Charles, stubborn as ever, refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. Sean, furious after hearing about Charles's cruelty, shoved him to the ground and then went after Rennie to comfort her. As they walked away, Jason, who had been lying motionless after the car collision, suddenly revived. His next target was now the lone Charles. Charles, despite his disbelief, picked up his pace in an attempt to escape, but Jason quickly caught up with him, throwing him down from the second floor of a nearby building. In a darkly poetic twist, Jason seized Charles by the shoulders and plunged his head into a filthy water barrel, drowning him as payback for his earlier torment of Rennie using Jason's name. Elsewhere, Sean eventually found a heartbroken Rennie. After a comforting conversation, the two shared a kiss, but Jason, who despised seeing young couples in love, appeared abruptly, interrupting the moment. Sean grabbed Rennie's hand, and they ran to the nearby subway station. Once inside a subway car, they thought they were safe until they turned to see Jason standing menacingly in the next car, staring through the glass. Due to his hockey mask, Jason seemed more like a strange passenger than a killer, and none of the other commuters responded to their cries for help. As Jason advanced, Sean pulled the emergency brake lever. The sudden stop threw Jason backward, giving Sean and Rennie the chance to open the door and escape. Jason stumbled after them, but Sean tackled him into the subway tracks, where a surge of high-voltage electricity coursed through Jason's body. After Jason's agonized screams faded, he lay motionless, and Sean and Rennie believed the nightmare was finally over. Hand in hand, they exited the subway station, awestruck by the bustling streets of New York. But just as they began to dream of a brighter future, Jason reappeared. He had survived the electric shock, his revival linked to the very power of electricity. Upon spotting Jason again, Rennie and Sean resumed their frantic escape. As they fled, Jason kicked aside a radio belonging to some street thugs, who attempted to confront him. They quickly regretted it. Rennie and Sean dashed into a nearby diner, begging the staff to let them call the police about the madman chasing them. Before they could explain further, Jason burst through the door. A security guard tried to stop him, but Jason easily threw him into a glass wall. No matter where Rennie and Sean hid, Jason seemed to have an uncanny ability to track them down. Their last refuge was the city's sewer system, where they encountered a maintenance worker who warned them that every night at midnight, toxic waste flooded the sewers. With only minutes until midnight, the worker offered to guide them to safety, but Jason soon appeared, killing the man and turning his attention to an unconscious Sean. Just as Jason was about to strike, Rennie shone a flashlight in his face. Grabbing his attention, she taunted Jason, drawing him closer, then broke open a barrel of toxic sludge, splashing it directly at him as he neared. The corrosive waste caused Jason immense pain, and for the first time, Rennie saw his true face under the hockey mask, a sight so horrifying it startled her. Taking advantage of Jason's pain, Rennie returned to Sean's side, helping him to his feet, but even then, Jason refused to let them go. Stumbling, he grabbed Rennie by the leg just as the toxic waste began to flood the sewer. Midnight had arrived, and as the waste poured in, Jason seemed to relive his own drowning. Unable to escape the flood, Jason was overwhelmed by the toxic sludge. When the chaos finally subsided, Sean and Rennie, watching from higher ground, realized they had survived. Looking back, they saw that the corrosive waste had transformed Jason into the innocent form of his younger self. His blood-stained hockey mask drifted away, disappearing into the unknown. As dawn broke over New York City, Sean and Rennie embraced tightly in the street. They knew that, after this ordeal, the next step was to fulfill their promise made on the boat to climb the Statue of Liberty together, symbolizing a fresh start and newfound freedom.